Gentlemen, ladies, variations thereupon, welcome to the very first ever AJTV Live. How cool is that? It's a show that just keeps being rebirthed. Whoa, my arm is cut off. Oh no. I am the titular AJ, and today we are going over a pretty interesting match from PT Aether Revolt, which just happened this past weekend between Pro Tour champion Alexander Hayne and Ken Yukuhiro. But I feel like before we start, we should talk about what this is. If you're unfamiliar with AJTV, it is a show where I just go over matches in excruciating detail. And originally it was just kind of like this, except not live, and then it went into a more heavily scripted version, and then a heavily edited version, and now I'm back to sort of rambling, but with an audience. So, theoretically, we're going to be able to do this regularly, and if you would like to help the show have some regularity, you can do that by following on all of the platforms and hitting me up on Twitter with match suggestions so that I know what you want me to go over, because I don't always have time to watch every single match to find the good ones. If you couldn't hear it in my voice, I am quite ill, so hopefully we can power through this and you don't mind the nasally, throaty grossness. But yes, the other form of participation on your part is that since this is live, you can ask questions. I'll mostly be ignoring the chat for the main part of the show, but then I'm going to open it up and answer as many questions as I can. And they can be about the match or the show or something completely different, or different things from the PT, stuff like that. Whatever you want to ask, I will try and answer. Cool? Cool. 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 So, as I said, this was a match between Alex Hayne and Ken Yukuhiro, which is especially interesting because PT Aether Revolt was the first one with the team series, and these are the final standings with Masashi tied in first and face to face right behind. And as you can see, both of our players on those two teams. This was also at 9-3, which meant that the winner goes on, and the loser is most likely out of top 8 contention, so stakes were high. And look at the deck list real fast. We have a green-black Constrictor deck. Constrictor is just busted. The card is great, and no surprise to see people building with it and Gear Hulk and Walking Ballista. These decks tend to be a little on the slower side of aggro, which is kind of where you want to be, because you are faster than the other aggro decks, but still fast enough to pressure control decks. Although control decks don't really exist, as we are pushing more and more into the era of everything being on board and lots of combat and removal and stuff like that, which is why we're talking about tactical racing today. But on the other side, we have the boogeyman of the format, which made up 6 of top 8 Mardu Vehicles in the hands of Alex Hayne. Fairly stock list. The only kind of difference is that going forward, people are more likely to be playing Fatal Push's main probably over the shocks. It was a lot more important to have the shocks when Saheeli Rai combo was going to be a big part of the metagame, but Saheeli Rai is kind of being hated out, kind of being boxed out. There's a lot of cheap removal, and people were ready for it, so it's a lot more important to be able to kill all of the giant monsters that Shock doesn't quite always get done. Other than that, fairly stock list from Alex. And so, let us jump into the first game. Bang. Liliana creepily staring in the background. So this is game one. It's actually, we can speed through it because it is disappointing, but it gives you context for how the match plays out. Ken keeps a 1 land attuned with Aether hand, and doesn't play a 3rd land. You can go even faster. Look at that. Alex actually steals the play with a shock here, which is super valuable and part of the reason why Fatal Push is so good. Because when everything costs 1 and 2 mana, being able to do 2 things in a turn or steal the play like this is very, very valuable. And so, this is one of the many Constrictor interactions in this deck, though not enough to win a game on its own against a 2-mana 4/4. Spot removal. Ken Yukuhiro always fighting. If you're not going to be blocking, you might as well be attacking, which will come into play in game 2. Some stats for you that I tweeted out looking over the deck lists. Heart of Kirin was 26 of a possible 32 in the top 8. Scrap Heap Scrounger was 31 of a possible 32 in top 8. And Unlicensed Disintegration, which Alex drew 2 of this game, was 28 of 32. All 4 ofs, all main deck in 7 decks. The green-black deck in top 8, only one to not have disintegrations. It's one of those things where all of the super powerful cards all work well together and are in the same colors. Convenient. Wouldn't you say? So, pretty fast. Game 1, missing land, still bad. We can slow down and actually follow this game. Yukuhiro with a very slow draw of comes into play tapped lands. Hayne's 1-drop just hit for 3, which is the world we now live in. And the first major decision comes up. The Rakshasa can be cast as a 3/3 here, and then Ken is likely taking 7, or hold up Murder. Which, by thinking this long, Rishkar is the name of that card. By holding up 3 mana after thinking this long, Alex knows that it is Murder, but each creature is hitting so hard that it's not that big a deal. Plus, with Heart of Kirin being legendary, running it into a Murder is not necessarily the worst, especially when you have a second copy, because it unlocks that second copy. It's part of what makes Heart so powerful, is that the first one probably kills him, and if it doesn't, then your second one is on, and that'll probably kill him. Sure enough, murder on the Heart of Kirin. A fatal push is a good draw. And now Rikshar comes down. Rishka. But again, with threes coming across from Alex, it's really hard to engage in combat. Because what are you going to do? Block? You're taking 3 damage and 1 for 1ing at a huge mana disadvantage. Probably not going to get you anywhere. Ken's hand is Fatal Push, Gear Hulk, and some lands. So he's really setting up Gear Hulk here. And we have another crux point. With Scrounger coming down pre-combat to make sure that the Exemplar gets the pump. So that, you know, a Fatal Push on the Scrounger doesn't both kill the Scrounger and shrink the Exemplar. And now Ken has a decision to make. Fatal Push on one of these creatures, the Exemplar, presumably the one that doesn't come back, is the obvious choice. You know, you save 3 damage and use all your mana. Pretty effective. But instead of just autopilot firing it off, Ken has a lot to think about here, as he can clog up the ground next turn with Land Gear Hulk. He has 2 things bigger than 3s that can block and hold down the grounds, but will still be vulnerable in the air, which Heart of Kirin would be a pretty big threat if Ken uses his Fatal Push here. Without the Fatal Push for a second Heart, he would likely die in the air. But, he could probably deduce that it's very likely, or at least above chance, that Alex does have another Heart of Kirin because of his ability, or his willingness to run his first Heart into the obvious murder. It's not a huge difference in weighted probabilities, but it is a slight tipping in that direction. But Ken chooses not to, chooses not to take the full 6, and Heart of Kirin does come down after the Fatal Push, which is unfortunate. So now, with no answer to the Heart of Kirin, holding the ground becomes a lot less valuable. So what do? Just play your Gear Hulk and hope that in 3 hits of Heart of Kirin you can draw another removal spell, having used 2 already, a Murder and a Fatal Push. Ken says no, and chooses, instead, to go on the offensive. Verter's Gear Hulk does come down, and he makes a slightly interesting split here, going 3 on Rishkar and 1 on the Gear Hulk. Presumably the one on the Gear Hulk is... Presumably this is because of this mana with Ballista in hand. But are you really going to tap your 5/5 for mana? Doesn't seem too likely. And 4 already gets above all of the 3s on the ground for Alex. Not to mention, this should be red, not pink. Make it easier to see, hopefully. Is this easier to see? Marginally. It 5 doesn't make a difference for attacking and shocking. So the only real difference here, besides the Rishkar mana, which is pretty marginal, is that Heart of Kirin has Vigilance and thus can not only look to block the Gear Hulk, but also enables a Scrounger to sort of turn into a pseudo blocker, which would basically add a blocker in a way, and being able to trade off there is not necessarily what he wants to do. So, does the math, figures it's worth it to put a counter here. And again, could easily just hold down the fort, but the Heart of Kirin flies over and puts him on a 3-turn clock, so that's no good. Instead, decides we are now racing, which I touched on it earlier, but so much of the play is on board and creature-based and aggro, you know, not mirrors, but aggro on aggro matchups, that basically if you don't think you're racing, you're probably wrong. And you're probably losing because you're wrong. Or potentially losing because you're wrong. And so 6 comes across. And another reason that Ken thinks that it's possible to get that attack in is it's not necessarily a given that both Scroungers will be able to crash. Obviously, the Gear Hulk blocks one, and that something can crew the Heart. Because going from 14? Oh, sorry, I was looking at Alex's life total. 11, right? The thing about 11 is that it's 3 turns from Heart. Whereas if this combat happens, where something comes along to crew the Heart, now this attack is doing 7 past the Gear Hulk. 7 minus 11 is 4, and it's a 2-turn clock all of a sudden thanks to Heart. So, not leaving back this blocker for both Scroungers is huge. It's a full turn off of the clock. But that's an assumption that Ken has to go off of based on Alex being down to, what, 2 cards? And hopefully he can't play something to crew the Heart and get this attack in. Because, again, he's not leaving it up to chance. He's not leaving it up to, I need to draw a removal spell. He's saying, let's race, and I think I can win under a certain number, or under a certain set of circumstances. And one of those potential circumstances is, one of the ways that this could play out from that position is if Alex doesn't have this extra creature to crew the Heart of Kirin, then this attack from the Rishka is basically free. But that's not what happens. Motorist does come down. The fact that it's Motorist doesn't matter because, again, it's, you know, this is 5 instead of 4, but it's 5 plus 3, 8 to 11. It's 3. Heart is still lethal in the same number of attacks. So that part doesn't matter. The fact that it's Motorist or / Depala doesn't matter, but the fact that it is a creature that can crew the Heart does matter. Although, it would matter if, potentially, if the Gear Hulk hadn't gone up. Because then Heart could just fly over, and the Motorist threatens to make the Heart a 5/5 blocker, and eat the Gear Hulk. Now it would have to trade. So sure enough, Gear Hulk does eat one of the Scroungers. Excuse me. and Ken takes 7, dropping to only 3. He draws Fatal Push. Now, it looks like Fatal Push is an unbelievably great draw. The truth is that it almost doesn't matter. That's how sharp Ken's attack last turn was. And I will illustrate why, if this will cooperate. There we go. His last 2 cards in hand, I mean, he drew the Fatal Push this turn, but his last 2 cards in hand were Ballista and a 6th land. So, you can attack with both these creatures, and if Alex just takes it all, then 6th land Ballista is lethal. That's how huge Gearhulk is. This is 6 and 5, 11 to 14, 3, 6th mana. That's 3 Ballista shots to the dome. Now, theoretically, you attack. Hayne could bring back Scrounger. Remember the Exemplar from way earlier is in here. Scrounger activates the Heart, and the Heart can chump. That actually looks good, right? Now you have 3 lethal attackers against no blockers. There's a Hissing Quagmire here, so 3 attackers versus 1 blocker. The problem is, with 6 land, you have 3 plus 1 for the Hissing Quagmire, and then you can use the other 2 mana to play a 1/1 Ballista, chump a Scrounger, shoot the 3/1. The fact that this attacker up here, let me kill this. The fact that this attacker is 1 toughness means that a 1/1 Ballista can take out 2 attackers, and Quagmire, bing, could take out the 3rd, and then obviously these 2 attackers, again, the next turn are lethal no matter what. The Heart is gone because it chumped. Obviously, Fatal Push makes that way easier, but he drew the Fatal Push. He set this game up in a way where he wouldn't need the Fatal Push, which is really, really impressive. When I was watching this live, I thought, wow, Alex completely blundered this game away by not activating Scrounger and blocking. But the truth is, it doesn't matter. With Ken's 2-card hand being Ballista, 6th land, it doesn't... The only way that it matters is that Alex gives himself a 4-outer. He gives himself a 4-outer to Unlicensed Disintegration, because instead of dying right there, he gets the turn back and then dies on the next turn. So, it is a slight blunder. Alex definitely missed an opportunity for a potential 4-outer there. But it's also pretty devastating if you try and play to your... why is this not jumping back? There we go. If you try and like play to your 4-outer, assuming that type of very specific card combination, and then Ken has something else, and this was just some insano bluff, then you might look pretty stupid. But with 6-land Ballista, none of that matters, except for that Ken wasn't bluffing, and Alex could have given himself a 4-outer. But that you can see how this was all keyed up. Oop, not a block. This was all keyed up by that first attack, where Ken dealt 6 damage to Alex in exchange for taking potentially 3 on the way back. Which, 6 for 3 sounds good, but when Ken was so behind on life total, it's actually not good. He would rather have the 3 life, especially with the way that the math worked out with Heart of Kirin. That 3 life was a full turn, a full extra attack that the Heart wouldn't have to take for lethal. But again, that's a risk he was willing to take, that Alex wouldn't have this or wouldn't have another follow-up play to that, or that if he did, then Ken still has access to drawing something like a Fatal Push. So, the lesson from this game: if you think that you're not racing, you're probably wrong. Look for this type of attack. By all metrics, this first attack, we can go back to it actually. What? This. 10-second chunks is not enough to jump back. Here we go. This attack set up the whole thing, and in real time, it looked really bad. But obviously he had a game plan in mind. Yeah. Ifro in the chat points out, I kind of talked about it. The extra counter, or the distribution of going 3-1 was... Where's my pen? There we go. The distribution of going +3, +1, instead of just putting all 4 on Rishkar, was definitely an interesting thing. Again, it's a really sharp position, right? The tactics involved with the Heart of Kirin, especially when you know that Alex has access to things like Motorist and Depala, which he actually has 2 Depala and 4 Motorist, I believe, then you can get into this awkward standoff, which you don't want to have to do. You need your Gear Hulk attacking. But yeah, super tight game and really cool and strong line by Ken. And he takes it down. Here, I always forget how to get rid of that. There we go. So, we move to game 3. Liliana's still creeping. Again, being on the play, pretty substantial advantage. Assuming you don't miss land drops like Ken did in game 1. But, 3-Ribbon Inspector, not the most aggressive start. And another tap land. We can actually speed this up for these first couple turns at least. Aether Hub as your second land can be a little awkward, but it's not necessarily a problem here because Attune with Aether can help. But the Constrictor comes down, and before that can get out of hand, it is disintegrated without license. He does a little sort of out-of-order sequencing here. His turn is Attune Constrictor, but he plays the Forest and then attunes off of that, and then plays Constrictor, which is slightly suboptimal because now Alex knows that you have a Swamp in hand. Not a huge deal, but just as easily could have played the Attune off of this, played his Swamp from his hands, and played the Constrictor off the Swamp in the hub. But does it this way instead. And Gideon comes down. So, really settling in for a much more controlling game here. Turn 2 Inspector, turn 3 Removal, turn 4 Gideon is not the hyper aggro start from the play that Mardu Vehicles is infamous for, but a really solid board. I mean, he has 8 permanents to 5. That's a pretty good advantage. Constrictor attacks the Gideon, and this is what we talk about with tactical racing. This is classic limited magic. Attack my 2/3, double block with a 2/2 and a 1/2, removal spell for the 2-for-1. It's not a full 2-for-1 because a token doesn't really count, but for only 1 mana, Ken is trying to make up some of that permanent, wow, AJ, permanent disadvantage. Getting some more traction on the board, which is vital for pressuring Gideon. Nothing like Ruinous Path or anything like that. He has to take out the Gideon the hard way, which means he needs to get through this glut of creatures. Obviously, Hayne is totally fine with that value, or with the value of that exchange. Basically traded a Fatal Push for a token and an Inspector whose clue is still here. That's way profitable card economy-wise, but Ken can't worry about the card economy right now. He has to catch up on board first. Good news for him, Hayne is digging with a clue, which is not how Alex wanted to spend his mana this turn. Ballista came down with 2 counters thanks to the Constrictor. Again, this interaction is just... This interaction and Gear Hulk being the 3rd piece is like the triumvirate of Standard, or at least of this deck. And here, after the clue is cracked, Cultivator Caravan comes down and a 2/2 is made. And we have another super sharp position. Ken plays his 5th land, and now has decisions to make. Fatal Push in hand, and looking to apply pressure to this Gideon, ideally take it off the board. He actually has Grasp and Fatal Push in hand. His 3rd card is Appetite for Destruction, I think is what it's called. The 3-mana Disenchant, gain 2. But a lot of options with combat here, especially with multiple removal spells that he could be playing. Almost activates the Ballista, which could have been nightmarish, but ends up attacking Gideon with both first. Hayne obviously pretty much obligated to block to protect the Gideon, and Ken activates the Ballista to try and save it. If this just happens, the game is over. I mean, Alex loses on the spot. But off of the Caravan, the Fatal Push that Ken had to expect, and no damage comes through. Remember, the 2/2 blocked the Ballista, and the Constrictor got pushed before combat. So Gideon's still at 4, with Ballista at 3. If the Gideon takes 2 damage from the Constrictor or something else, then the Ballista can just shoot the Gideon down in upkeep before Alex gets to activate it. You don't want to do it on your turn because it still has damage on it from combat, so your Ballista would die, which would be quite unfortunate. But with that little tactical flourish of the bonus mana from the Caravan, you getting the Fatal Push off lets Alex continue to develop his board with the Caravan, which is key, but also protect Gideon for yet another turn. And keep the extra counter off from the Constrictor off of the Ballista, which is also relevant as Alex continues to try and develop a board, which is hard to do against an active Ballista, even with a Planeswalker and a vehicle. But Alex is definitely behind, if only for the fact that he has a hand full of lands, but we can push this advantage bar a little bit, I think. He is definitely flooded. and active Ballista threatens to cold a lot of Alex's deck. Like, Alex has a lot of dead or semi-dead draws while Ballista is active. Has to take one from the Artifact City of Brass thing to activate Shambling Vent. Plays Exemplar. And plus Gideon. Now, another super sharp position. There we go. So, Ballista on 3, Gideon up to 5. The candidate play, the initial knee-jerk reaction is bang. Pow pow, pew pew. Ballista shoot the Exemplar. Exemplar can't activate the Caravan. You only take 7. Pretty good turn. Super efficient, right? Then, which order do I want to explain this in? All right, so say that happens. You now have a 2/2 Ballista against a Gideon at 5. You basically has to take his whole turn to get the the Quagmire into the Gideon and use the other counter. You're left with a 1/1 Ballista to take out the Gideon on this next turn, because now that it's up to 5. And getting your Ballista that low is potentially scary. Because, first of all, you want your Ballista to stick around to blank any further X1s, such as Exemplars or the Motorist. But also, this Needle Spires is very, very threatening. If the Ballista ever goes away, or even down to 1. If it goes down to 1, then Alex can basically force a trade by attacking with the Needle Spires, assuming that the board stays the same, because this is a big chunk of damage that Ken is not likely going to be able to take after taking a big hit this turn. So, that's one thing. The other thing is that I'm pretty sure he has Fatal Push in hand. There we go. Which... oh, I guess he doesn't. I guess it's Grasp. It's Grasp, Appetite, and Ballista. So Fatal Push is going to be drawn next turn. Spoilers, but that would make this turn a lot easier. But again, this candidate play seems super strong, right? You shoot here, then Alex can either attack with these two, or use the Shambling Vent and the now 1/1 Exemplar to fire up the Caravan and get in for 10, but not gain the 2 life. Either way, pretty big chunk. But to the shock of the broadcasters, Ken just straight up lets the Exemplar grow, pump the Caravan, or activate the Caravan, and get in for 12, 2 lifelink, dropping Ken all the way down to 4. Now, the reason, again, is a lot like what he did in Game 2. If you look at the very next turn, what does the board look like? And what would you rather have? I mean, it takes some guts, let me tell you. I'm not trying to say that this is an easy decision. It takes some guts in contention for top 8 of a Pro Tour to just take a 12 ball to the dome like that. But instead of effectively time walking himself this turn and being left with a tiny ballista for the low price of some extra damage. What is essentially 2 extra damage, or 3 extra damage? Some extra damage. You save yourself a ton of headache on this turn. By leaving your ballista at 3, you allow, you open up all this mana where you don't have to activate your creature land. You get to just straight up attack the Gideon with the ballista down to 2. And now, I mean, you don't even need to do anything else. This kills this if you want it to. The extra 2, it is 2 extra damage, right? I don't know why I thought it was 3. The extra 2 damage that you're taking here, the difference between 4 and 6 is not huge. It's 2 unlicensed disintegrations, which is relevant. But it's not 1 unlicensed disintegration, right? Crucially. And for that small price, for what looks like a major price, but is actually a small price of 2 damage, this turn is just miles more efficient. Which is important when you're trying to hard mode a Planeswalker. Which he does. Bang, bang. Gideon down. Now again, we're at this sort of tenuous position where Ken is definitely ahead. This advantage bar needs to be like here. Ken is definitely ahead, but he needs to keep an eye on this Needle Spires. He can't just shoot the Exemplar and, you know, go crazy with it. It's like in chess having a piece on your side of the board. Like, you always need to know what squares are covered, or have their squares covered, because if Alex is able to trade some of his lands for ballistas, I mean, Alex is flooded. He doesn't want more lands. And ballistas are the key to surviving and turning the corner eventually. So what happens instead is... Where's my pen? There we go. Gotta get used to these hotkeys. Ken plays another ballista for 1. So now he has... Whoops. The motors just got played. He's eyeing this, but he's also eyeing the Spires. And has Appetite or Grasp up. The Motorist is played, which is obviously... just looks terrible against a bunch of walking ballistas. But does let him scry, which is not nothing. And again puts him in a position where, come on. There we go. Also puts him in a position where he can sort of pressure these ballistas to off themselves, and give Alex a giant portion of his deck back into the land of live draws. So trigger the Exemplar. And in response, Ken Appetites the Caravan. Another kind of interesting play. This is not an artifact. Had this been a Scrounger, I'm very curious how Ken would have played it out. But without the extra artifact, now he can deal with this gigantic threat that he has no other way of dealing with. You know, Grasp doesn't kill it straight up. And the Exemplar doesn't get pumped. He doesn't have to worry about that. And by doing it now, he enables the Shambling Vent, or Needle Spires, but obviously Needle Spires isn't great here. Enables the Shambling Vent to get active, but keeps the Exemplar from being pumped, which keeps a lot of the pressure off of his ballistas, which is key. He also, crucially, goes up to 6 life. Now again, 3 is the point that he wants to avoid. Going to 3 means that you're in the danger zone. But going up to 6 is a lot of protection against that reach, this incidental reach of unlicensed disintegrations and shocks if they're still in his deck. So as you saw there, that I kind of talked over, because the exemplar, oops, hit. Because the exemplar is not pumped, Ken gets to do the trick that he almost pulled off last game, which is block and then shoot, and takes no damage. Still has a ballista around, which is crucial for eyeing these guys down. And is above the danger zone still. Giant ballista lets Ken just shoot the 3-1 now. And he's no longer in danger of being like spot removal, untap, attack you with a Needle Spires, which would be a pretty upsetting way for Ken to lose this game. But the extra ballista protects him a lot, and he can tap out for it here. He doesn't have to worry about stop. There we go. Because of the 2 life gained from the appetite, he can use all of his mana. He does have a grasp, so he could just have played this for 2, shot the 3-1, had 2 1-1 ballistas. Oops. Had 2 1-1 ballistas, and then held up grasp for Shambling Vent. But he can just pour that extra 2 mana into the ballista and take 2. And take 2 from the Shambling Vent because he's only going to 4, which means that he's still not in the danger zone. And that extra counter means basically 4 mana later on. It's only 2 mana now, and it's 4 mana if you wait. So he saved 2 mana on the deal, which is crucial because he needs those counters to continue boxing out such a huge portion of Alex's deck, as well as eyeing down the Needle Spires. So, Long Tusk Cub with no energy. A fine, if un-miraculous draw. Ken thought about getting real aggressive there and pumping a ballista just to get in for 2 damage, but there's no point. Rather just sit and wait. And play a little defense. Scrounger gets in. You do have to do something here. Now again, I actually think that just trading off Cub is totally legit here. I think that these counters on the ballistas are so valuable, and the Cub is so meh, that I don't mind just like trading here, pumping, and getting one of your ballistas up to 4. But Ken values the Cub over the counters, and instead blocks. The block is just for show, but pump up to 3 counters and then shoot down to 2. Inspector, and not cracking right away, playing a land and passing. The only other black source for Alex to activate the Shambling Vent is the Spire, so he actually needs this artifact if he wants to threaten to activate the Shambling Vent, which he does want to hold that up to threaten to activate because he wants to try and square it off against the long tusk cub. And that's why he doesn't just crack the clue right away looking for, you know, something big, some Gideon or something like that. Needs the black mana that the clue provides. And instead of this game continuing and being close and interesting, but definitely in Ken's favor, he draws a Verter's Gearhulk. And the game gets a lot less close and a lot less interesting. Yep, pretty good card. Pretty good card, pretty good draw. All Ken has to do now is make sure to respect the creature lands and to kill Alex as fast as possible so that he doesn't get domed out by running burn spells. Which theoretically could happen, but especially with the clue in play. But nothing you can do about it now. So he actually goes 1, 2, and puts one on the cub, which is, again, out of respect for the Shambling Vent, the potential Shambling Vent block on the Long Tusk Cub attack. Yeah. So the cub getting up to 3 means that this is no longer in play. You know, you could double, but then 2 counters off of the ballista, and you get your Shambling Vent eaten. So instead of any of that nonsense, he cracks his clue, sees if he can find something, some removal spell, an Unlicensed Disintegration specifically, or Fatal Push would also be quite good. Doesn't, so the cub gets in there and energizes up. Scrounger comes back, which is not nothing, even though it's boxed out on offense. It does sort of enable any vehicles drawn by Alex, so it is important to remember that. And again, Ken has to hope that it's not just a bunch of removal, or a bunch of burn. Same difference in the case of Unlicensed Disintegration. And also to try and kill Alex as soon as possible, which, as it stands, would happen not next turn, but the turn after. Chandra Torch of Defiance was the draw. And that's pretty interesting, because that does put Ken in burn range, and while going up to 5 loyalty, with the chump blocker, means that the potential for a situation where Ken has to take almost a full turn's worth of attacks off in order to take out the Chandra so he doesn't die, giving Alex, instead of just this 1 draw, maybe 2, or instead of no draws, maybe 1. I guess if it's no draws, then you're dead anyway. Instead of maybe 1 draw, you get maybe 2. If you were to get 1 draw, then you definitely get 2. There we go. Took me a couple tries to figure out what I was saying there, but pretty tense spot there. But it is all for naught, as Ken does indeed find lethal through the Inspector. Which I think he had anyway. I guess we can check. So what he ends up doing is playing Constrictor and then activating a Ballista and using those 2 counters to take out the Thraben Inspector. And then it's 4 plus 3, 4. If the Constrictor is not in play, 5 if it is. And then here, let's do this more organized. there. Constrictor, activate a ballista, activate the cub, put 2 counters on it, shoot, shoot. So this is 4. 2 plus 3 is 5, which is 9. 3 and 2 is 5, which is 14. Plus shoot for 5 is 19. So, let's see if he could have done it without Snake. That's what I'm interested in. He just goes Grasp and Activate, right? How do I go back? There we go. Let's see. This is pointless, I'm just curious. 4. This goes up to 4 instead of 5. Grasp takes this out, and this gets pumped once, so that's 6. So that's 14. Yeah, it's actually 1 more damage. It's 2 overlethal instead of 1 overlethal. Chat saying he's short. I don't think so. Go over it one more time. 4. This is 2 plus 1 plus 1 is 4. That's 8. The Grasp takes this out. 1 activation. Up to 4. And that's 6. 6 plus 8 is 14. Phew. That's what a 14 looks like, right? 14. And then you have 6 counters, so it's 20 damage total. The way that he does it is, I'll just let it play out. Snake. Activate a ballista for 2. Activate Cub for 2. Yeah, the Quag is not used. Attack. Shoot the Inspector. And now you have 4 plus 5 is 9, plus 5 is 14, plus 5 more is 19. Bang! Bang and ta-da. Let it play out and see the handshake. Bang bang. And Ken Yukuhiro advances in a very combat-heavy, racing, tactical match. And so, where's my other scene? There we go. What'd you think? Pretty cool, huh? I really liked how Ken just always made that, like, it's not even really hard plays, it's just there's one play in each game where the instinct is wrong, right? Your knee-jerk reaction, that's a super high value play, leaves you in a worse position the turn after, and Ken just takes the extra second, visualizes the board the turn after, and takes the extra damage to his face. And is in a way better position for it. And comes away with the match. So, I now ask you if you have any questions, either about the match or the Pro Tour or anything else, as I catch up with the chat a little bit. Ken is decent indeed. He's also hilarious. He was one of the first big Japanese streamers on Nico Nico, and he is a very, very funny man. Doesn't speak a ton of English, but still finds a way to be hilarious to me. Death Snow on Twitter. Check him out. Taking the 12 is something that I don't think I would have done. Yeah, I mean, it's real scary, right? when you're in that position of like way behind on board and taking a ton of damage against an aggro deck. But if you just take a deep breath before, you know, just going with the knee-jerk play, it becomes pretty clear that his play was superior to the candidate move. Yeah, he always has a brew. This is like the most stock deck that he's played at multiple Pro Tours. And by multiple Pro Tours, I mean for like 5 years. He always cooks up something insane. He was the one that had the blue-black Cypher deck from that one Pro Tour. You guys remember that deck? The first question is, how's your back doing, AJ? It's all right. I mean, not great, but definitely, it's definitely been much worse in the past than it is now. How useful was the advantage bar to make coverage more watchable to an average person? I would give it like a D-. The idea is there, but the utilization was kind of poor. And they got better at it over time. They actually started pretty good at it and then ended up pretty good at it, but got like complacent in the middle. But Ian was really good about being like, so the advantage bar is going to be pushed slightly and, you know, like moves it, and then is like, the reason that it's moving is because of this, right? Like in this matchup, having more mana is one of the most important things, and because player A has 2 more mana, he's advantaged. You know, the advantage bar itself is useless without the extra information. It's a tool, right? It's a tool, a visual tool for telling the story of the match. If you just have somebody fiddling with a dial and a bar is going back and forth, it doesn't mean anything to the person. But if you're saying, oh wow, he missed that 3rd land drop, so he's way behind now, and then you have the visual representation of the words that you're saying as you're saying them, then that can help get people into the pattern of watching? I don't know, into the groove of watching and understanding sort of what's going on. Yes, a lesson in not getting tunnel visioned. Ken's play also kind of depended on Hayne having nothing else, close to nothing else. I mean, he was hellbent the turn before, like, a removal spell is going to be good. I don't necessarily think that it was, like, a position where he was being unnecessarily risky, if that's what you're trying to imply. Advantage bar is useful if you tune in mid-match. Well, it's useful if one tunes in mid-match who doesn't understand, like, the depths of competitive Magic. Like, I mean, when I tune in, I don't look for the advantage bar, like, because I can parse the game state pretty quickly and get a more accurate view of how everything stands than a bar from the broadcasters could. But for somebody that hasn't been playing for 10 years, 10 plus years, it's definitely a useful tool. If they keep using the bar, yeah, they're gonna get better at it, of course. Thank you, Doretti Mom Spaghetti. Pretty absurd screen name. Is PTs only or gonna be during GPs as well? For the advantage bar, I don't know. I would assume they would do it for the GP. It's pretty non-taxing for a potentially large advantage to the uninitiated audience. I think that the visual that they had for this initial visual, the like gray on gray, weirdly above the life totals, like I don't think that's ideal. I think that there's definitely a lot they could improve on, but this was like a beta run, and I think that it's good. Give me a donation. Oh, I turned the alerts off. but I can open that up and thank anybody that donated or subscribed if they let me onto my dashboard. What the hell? All right, if there's no more questions, well, they're not letting me log into, into Streamlabs. So, thank you for your donation, and thank you to anybody else who subbed or donated that I missed because I was talking. But this will be up tomorrow on newmontgaming.com, the full video. So if you missed the beginning or want to rewatch it or share it with somebody else, then you can do that. And I will be back on Friday for a normal stream, and then next week, I might stream early, but on next Wednesday, again, today's Wednesday, next Wednesday, we're going to do another one of these. If not an AJTV, then something else that's Magic related without playing Magic, like a podcast or something like that. Or just another AJTV if there's good matches to go over. So shoot me some good matches on Twitter. And thank you all for watching. And everybody, good night. Good night, good night, good night.